Guy Waldrop. Guy was born and raised in Alabama. He came to Lexington to go to Transylvania University, Lexington Theological Seminary, returned to the University of Alabama where he served in the campus ministry. Is that right, Guy? That's correct. And then back up this direction, and among the churches he served was Arlington Christian Church. Some of our brothers here who grew up in Arlington served there, and Guy as their pastor. And then for many years, of course, Guy was the regional minister of our Christian church, Disciples of Christ in Kentucky. And I must say, as I was coming up, Guy was one of the regional ministers I really looked up to and respected tremendously. And that respect and affection has only deepened since I've been able to arrive here. So Guy, welcome. Glad to have you this morning. Round of applause for Guy Walker.
Well, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the opportunity to address this esteemed crowd of folks and good men. Good to be here, to be a part of this. And first, I want to affirm the ministry and the witness of this historic congregation and the leaders who have kept it a vital faith community for the last 200 years. And we are now the recipients and the stewards of that great heritage. And I can tell you that never in my imagination, when I first worshiped here as a student at Transylvania in 1955, that I would ever be on the staff of Central Christian Church. And I'll confess that one of my major disappointments as a minister of evangelism was when we were purchasing this property and building the facilities here, expanding the parking, that Michael Moody would not let me put up a toot and tail or go to hell booth out here in the parking lot so that I toot and tail or go to hell. I don't know why they wouldn't let me do that. I got to do most everything else I wanted to do. But I want you to know that my idea has recently been stolen by a Catholic priest in California. He's retrofitted an ambulance into a mobile confessional booth and drives around all over California taking confessions. I think he stole my idea. I saw the TV segment on that a couple of months ago. Well, you do need to know something about my cultural context, my roots, to understand why I named my father as the most influential man in my life, and also share with you the difficult period in my life and tell you something about what I am most grateful. I am a native of Coleman, Alabama. Coleman was a thriving farm community when I was a youth. It still is for the most part. It was settled by German immigrants beginning in 1865 and incorporated in 1877. Colonel John Coleman brought over at least 10,000 immigrants from Germany who were looking for a place in the United States to purchase land, settle, and farm, much like they did in those small farms in Germany. And this means that small farms, meaning about what one family needed to raise their crops and perhaps to sell a little. The story goes that one immigrant came to Coleman, bought 50 acres, and my great-grandfather told him that he couldn't make a living on that, so he sold 25. I'm waiting. You all are not awake. The excess crop are strawberries, grapes, wine, milk products sold to surrounding counties. In fact, Coleman was known as the strawberry capital of the world, according to the promotion from Coleman. And each spring, they had a parade, strawberry festival parade, Strawberry Queen, all the festivities that go with that. Coleman is the home of a Roman Catholic monastery, a convent, and a liberal arts Catholic college. It has every flavor of Lutheran church, coming from that German background, United Church of Christ, and now all the mainline and evangelical churches are located there. The Disciples congregation in that community was started by German immigrants who were drawn to the Campbellstone movement. And most of the ministers who served that congregation were graduates of Transylvania University and the College of the Bible at that time, now Lexington Theological Seminary. By the early 1900s, several African-American families and farmers purchased land in the southern part of the area, close to Birmingham, and as you would expect, the schools in that day, as well as the churches, were segregated until 1966. Coleman was, and still is, one of the most segregated counties in the United States. I tell you this because I was raised in a segregated social system, and even in my college days here at Transylvania, there were no African Americans students on the campus. I taught and coached at Bryan Station High School in 1959, 1960, and the school system here in Fayette County was still segregated. I'll come back to this because this connects to something else I want to say later in this presentation. My parents were raised on a farm, completed high school, and began married life as farmers in Coleman County. But when I was age 3, my father joined the sheriff's department as the jailer, and our family lived in an apartment in the jail, and walked. So to get from our apartment in the jail to the kitchen, walk down the hall, past the incarcerated prisoners, who oftentimes made interesting comments, which is where I began my liberal arts education. My mother was the cook for the prisoners. My father ran, and then later my father ran for the office of High Sheriff when I was about 8 years old, and was defeated. So he bought a farm where we lived for 4 years, until he was later elected as the High Sheriff in the county. He held that office for over 16 years, as well as continuing to manage the farm. Well, manage the farm meant giving my mother and my brother and sister and I instructions of what to do. Life at home with a younger brother and sister was a time really a time of value formation. Strong work ethic, commitment to justice, obviously, as my father was an officer of the court, coached on how to get along with people as the son of a politician, taught to respect everybody, but not to be bullied by anyone. Don't get too big for your britches was also oftentimes a comment that was made by both my parents. I'm not sure why they ever said that. I never weighed more than 140 pounds. Learn all you can, even from farm animals. One of the things that you learn while milking the cow is that the cow switches her tail. You never tie the feed bucket to the tail of a cow unless you want a big knot on the back of your head. The other is that when I first was learning to plow, about 11, 12 years old, had to hold the plow stalk like this in order to reach it. But anyway, I was just running out the middles of the corn to kill the grass, and I can tell you that was a much better job than hoeing the grass out of the corn. At least I thought it was. So on my first attempt at plowing, my dad set everything up, put me behind old Babe in the plow, turned me loose. This was so much fun. I was yelling at old Babe, gee, ha, whoa, turn around, whoa. My dad watched this fiasco for about 5 minutes. Said, whoa, to old Babe. Babe stopped. He said, son, how long have you been plowing? And I said, well, I just started, you know. He said, how long do you think old Babe's been plowing? I said, well, I don't know, we've had her about 10 years. He said, who do you think knows the most about plowing? Would you please just stop yelling at old Babe and follow her? Well, you learn a lot on the farm, and then you can learn from mules that I thought were pretty dumb, but old Babe was obviously smarter than I was. My dad was a storyteller and used stories as a way to teach us lessons. Sometimes I would, after listening to some of his stories about, you know, let me tell you about old Joe, you know, how it happened to him. You know, we had to arrest him. He was in jail, and he was out drinking. And he dragged this story out forever and forever, and I would finally just say, Dad, just send me to my room. I don't hear anymore. This is too long. No, it's too long. And more punishment than I really wanted. But that didn't stop him. That was the way he communicated with us. And when I got involved in politics myself, running for the president of the high school student body and won, I came home extraordinarily proud, boasting about what I had done. And then my father asked this really penetrating question, which has followed me the rest of my life. Well, did you win because you were the best candidate or because you ran the best campaign? Well, he had high expectations for people who were elected to public office because he had high expectations of himself. But I can tell you that I've asked myself that question a lot of times, every time I was called to a position of leadership. How did I get here? And can I do what I promised I would do? My dad was an avid reader. I'm not going to tell you how I answered all those questions every time. My dad was an avid reader, even though he had only a high school education. The Atlanta Constitution newspaper was mailed to our house every weekend. And when it arrived, Dad was not to be disturbed for at least 2 or 3 hours. He was a Roosevelt, Truman, and Kennedy Democrat. He was the county campaign chairman for Carl Elliott, who ran for governor against the wife of George Wallace in 1964. Carl Elliott was a representative, or a congressman from Alabama, a U.S. congressman from Alabama. And he mortgaged his farm, everything he owned, in order to try to defeat the Wallace couple. Lurleen Wallace was actually running in George Wallace's place because George wasn't permitted to run again, repeat the office. He lost, obviously. He lost his house, lost his farm. But I also want you to know that Carl was the first recipient of the Kennedy Profile and Courage Award given in 1990. And he was also the author of the National Defense Education Act. Earlier, it was a congressman in 1958. They provided funds for higher education, trying to find ways to make college more affordable for low-income young people, and particularly for the people in the South. I think the proudest moment, one of the proudest moments of my dad's life was in 1990, when he had the honor of accompanying Carl, who was in a wheelchair, for the Kennedy Profile and Courage Award in Washington, D.C. by the Kennedy family. That was in May of 1990. And in October of 1990, my father and mother were both killed in an automobile accident. But he talked about that throughout the rest of his life. In 1966, the Ku Klux Klan brought a lawsuit against my dad as the sheriff because he would not allow the Klan to hold a rally on the steps of the county courthouse. And he told them, this is my county, this is my place, you cannot be here. Well, that went to circuit court in Birmingham, and the court did back him up and did not allow the rally to take place on the county courthouse. But it did take place on a farm around a pond that someone provided for the Klan. Dad went out in the patrol car, turned the siren lights on as they were meeting, and I asked him, why did you do that? He said, I just wanted them to know that this was my county, and I'm in charge, and I'm watching you. Later, the Birmingham News did a front page article on him with the headlines, "The No-Gun Toting Sheriff." He was always thankful that he never had to pull a gun or a weapon on anybody in his 16 years of law enforcement. He was also extraordinarily thankful that he was never shot, obviously. He never issued a pistol permit to anyone except a law enforcement officer. He didn't believe in the proliferation of guns in the county. And I asked him, why is that? He said, because I don't want to be shot. And he also said, because most people who own pistols and weapons like that oftentimes are more often to shoot their friends or relatives than they are to shoot somebody breaking into their house. But the basic values I learned from my father is why I look to him as the most influential man in my life. And even when I chose not to go to the University of Alabama and to law school, which he wanted so much, and he supported me in my decision to go to Transylvania. Even though he drove me up here in the road before the days of the interstate, he said, son, I hope you enjoy being here, because I'm not coming back. At Transy, I was really captured by the love of liberal arts, especially philosophy and religion and history. I chose to continue my studies at Lexington Seminary and was ordained in 1963 at the First Christian Church in Coleman. And the minister who had known me, was still there, known me in most of my youth, included in his remarks at my ordination, the reason that we are ordained, and I quote, the reason we are ordaining Guy is because we know that it will take a whole church to keep him faithful to the gospel. They say more about my youth than I really want to confess. But he was correct. And I will add that I have thought about that a lot, but also I will add that I have never felt alone at any particular point in my life, because it did take the church, the whole church, to keep me straight, and it did take the whole church to support me in my ministry, and I've never felt alone at any particular point in my life, like I was isolated from other people or from God, even in the most difficult times in my life. I'd like to mention briefly just another man who also influenced my life, particularly my ministry. Because in the 1960s, I was a chaplain of the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa and the pastor of the University Christian Church in Tuscaloosa. This particular man challenged me to enlarge my view of ministry and to engage the church in social justice. His name is Tom Linton, a barber, minister of a small African-American congregation, bivocational minister. He was the president of the African-American Ministerial Association in Tuscaloosa. And I was the president of the White Mainline Ministerial Association. Tom suggested that we merge the two associations and that we take on we take on the slumlords in Tuscaloosa and see if we could find ways to improve housing for the poor in that city. This would prove to be not the most popular thing that I got involved in my life, nor was it popular for anybody else in the church who got involved in that. Particularly since Robert Shelton, who was the Imperial Wizard of the United Klan of America, lived in Tuscaloosa, and it was also the headquarters for the Klan in the 1960s. But we did merge the associations, and we developed a strategy to call attention to poor housing conditions in some of the segregated sections of the community. I grew up, at least for 6 years. We lived in a 4-room farmhouse out on the farm with no running water, with a well, outhouse. And I can tell you that in all the poverty that I've seen in the rural South, I had never seen such deplorable living conditions and such poverty in the city of Tuscaloosa. Over 1,000 black citizens lived in small, substandard rental housing, clustered together with no water closets, no paved streets, no walks. Some of you all have been there in your bills with the Habitat for Humanity. We identified some of the slumlords who owned that property as members of the city council and as members of the white congregations, which were a part of our membership. We contacted key community leaders, tried to call attention to that. We also, fortunately, the dean of the University of Alabama School of Journalism was a member of my congregation. And also we contacted the representative from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development in Atlanta at the suggestion of my father, who knew the structures of national and city government much better than I did. We invited all these people to go with us on a tour of the area. We leased a bus. The university made a documentary of the substandard living conditions in the city. Went with us and filmed the bus tour. That documentary was shown on educational television, and within days, HUD canceled a $10 million grant to the city of Tuscaloosa that was designated to build sewers for an upscale housing subdivision in that city. Well, you can imagine what happened as a result of that, and I really don't have time to say a lot more about that today, except that it certainly did upset the power structure in the city, and many members of our white congregations, and many of the ministers who were with us on that tour. Nevertheless, Tuscaloosa did begin a process of enforcing housing codes and applied for federal grants for public housing and began to develop the first public housing in that city and that city had known. Some of you all have seen that. Some of those that have been there on the tour or on the Habitat for Humanity, those houses were built under a different kind of structure than the ones that are there now. Those are now torn down and have additional new public housing in the city. It was also where the tornado went through in that section, which some of you all have been in. I share this story because my participation in this effort really expanded my understanding of the mission of the church. The church's mission, in my understanding, out of that experience, and in many others, is not only to change the lives of individuals, but also to make the world a better place for all people, a place that reflects what I believe is the emerging kingdom of God. Tom Linton, that pastor, barber, is still in Tuscaloosa at his barber shop, still a bivocational pastor, that small congregation working in Tuscaloosa, still working to make Tuscaloosa a better place to live and a better city for everyone. 10 years ago, the city, which is interesting, and the university honored him with the Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Award for the city. I happen to have the privilege of participating in that. Tom and I are planning another visit this spring to continue to, as we often do periodically, to renew our friendship and our relationship. I'll always be grateful for Tom for pulling me and our church out of our comfort zone and into a mission that helped change the culture of a city and improve the quality of life for hundreds of people. But I'm now changing gear quickly. The most difficult period in my life was to watch my wife, Dell, who was a childhood sweetheart, high school sweetheart, for 40 years, continue to lose the use of her body little by little until multiple sclerosis claimed everything but her mind, her love for people, her zest for life, her indomitable spirit, her faith in God. I will also say that was a very difficult time, but I also share with you that it was, in many ways, one of the most rewarding periods of my life. We learned a lot from each other. We learned a lot about life. We learned a lot about faith. We learned a lot about prayer. And we learned a lot about the nature of being a part of a faith community, the church. I often recall during that time what my pastor said in my ordination: it will take a whole church to keep you faithful. And that's true. And I'll always be thankful for the prayers of the church that sustained us all, for the church members and friends showing up to visit us, for cards of encouragement, for phone calls, and all the ways that the church stood with Neil and our family. We never, ever, ever felt alone. Finally, quickly, I look back to the one thing for which I am most thankful. And that one thing is my opportunity for a college education. My education at Transylvania opened me to a world much bigger than Coleman, Alabama. I would spend my time doing something more than sorting sweet potatoes, 30 acres of sweet potatoes when I left home, and trying to make a decision between, is this a number 1, a number 2, a number 3, a seedling, or a jumbo? I'm glad I didn't spend the rest of my life doing that. But my education provided me with a way to grow in faith and open myself to the mysteries of God. My education gave me the opportunity to be a minister of the gospel, with the opportunities that with all the opportunities that afforded me. So many that I can't even begin to talk about those today, and we don't have time to do that anyway. But my education opened the door for me to live also as an informed person in this growingly complex global world that I still believe God calls us to love and to care for.